Okay, in part two of our conversation on conceptualization and measurement in research, I'm going to walk you through the second part of the chapter and also show you a couple of different YouTube videos that may help you understand these concepts a little bit better. So, when we think about measurement, we have to think about what are potential sources of data. And we generally have two different ways we go about doing research. One is using available data in what we call secondary data, which means that the data are collected either by other researchers for other purposes and other studies, or by official government processes such as the U.S. Census or the Uniform Crime Reports, keeping track of crime. And so when we're using one of these secondary data sources, the way things are measured are already determined, and we're not able to necessarily control what and how those things are measured. So keep in mind that secondary data is something that is commonly used in social science research, but the other type of data is primary data, where we're actually constructing our measurements, and that measurement can be done through survey procedures, developing single questions that are either open-ended or closed-ended. Open-ended would be, basically giving someone a question with a blank and expecting them to kind of come up with their own narrative to answer the question. And then, of course, closed-ended would be providing respondents in a study with a series of choices that they could choose from, which choices fit their experiences the best. And typically in a survey, we would probably want to have more than one question to tap into a concept, a variable that we want to study. So you'd often see a series of questions on the same general concept. And then often those individual items in a set are combined to create a scale or an index. And we'll talk a little bit about each one of those. And, as we've talked a little bit about the complexity of concepts, and, as certain concepts are more abstract, they have multiple dimensions, and so we need scales and to tap into all aspects of those concepts. And indices are more often appropriate when we're trying to sum up the totality of something. So, we have a delinquency index, for example, that takes these different items and counts up how many different times an individual endorsed, committing vandalism, stealing something of a value of more than $50, and on and on and on. So those items get combined together to form an index that would give us a quantitative measure that would have continuum from 0 times involved in these behaviors to adding up the total number. So indices are important. So under primary data collection, in addition to developing questions, there's also observational methods of collecting data. And the nice thing about observational research and gathering data this way is that it's often can be more accurate than self-reports, because self-reports are subject to poor recall, self-serving distortions, and if observation is done well, biases that individuals may have in observing would be removed, and what is recorded from directly observing behavior would be coded in a way to remove those biases. So in addition to measuring things directly, there's also ways that we can measure things indirectly, what are called unobtrusive measures. And basically, if you think about, if we're directly observing in a setting and people are aware of us observing, that may have some impact on their behavior. And what we know from prior studies is actually if you're in the setting long enough, it has very minimal effect on their behavior. But unobtrusive measures avoid that. And a great example, if you're interested in studying binge drinking on college campuses, rather than talking to people about how much they drink, you could count the beer bottles that are put out in the trash or the recycle after a frat party. And if you did this systematically, you could come up with some kind of estimate about how much alcohol is being consumed. And then you could have other ways of figuring out, are certain fraternities more likely to have issues with substance abuse than others, and kind of base it on studying people's trash. Interesting, potentially controversial, but just give you an example of an unobtrusive measure. We're not interfering in people's lives necessarily by counting their empty beer bottles. Okay, content analysis is another type of indirect measure that we use, and good examples of this would be analyzing newspaper articles on a particular topic, or looking through historical records and analyzing those records for particular research questions. And so, for example, if I was interested in trying to understand under what circumstances defendants plead self-defense in potential violent situations, I could look through court proceedings, the transcripts of those violent crimes, and look for cases in which self-defense was a successful plea, and compare it to those that were not, and see what the difference in terms of the circumstances would be. So again, content analysis, interesting. So again, kind of sum up where we've been and where we're going. We've talked about the concepts and how we start with something abstract, and our job when we get down to trying to measure it is to making that abstract term as concrete as possible. And we then start thinking about, well, what would the data sources be, and we carefully look around to see, does it already exist, or do we need to gather it ourselves and make judgments about, if the existing data is good enough, we can live with it, or if our research questions can only be answered by collecting new data. And then we can think about whether or not we're going to have direct contact with human subjects and intrude in their life in some way to collect the data, or if there are ways to unobtrusively get at what we're looking for. So we talk quite a bit about what we're measuring, and in most of our studies we're converting whatever the information that we gather into a numeric form so that we can perform statistical analysis. Some questions, some variables that we'll be interested in will not have numeric properties. And so there are 4 types of measurement that are important for us to understand. And basically, the level of measurements help us to think about how precise we're able to measure those concepts, and also how advanced the statistical analysis can be that we're doing. So at some point you should come back to this slide and jump in here and watch this 6-minute YouTube video. It will go over some of the same stuff that I'm going over, but it has a lot of nice visuals that will help you to kind of remember these concepts. Make sure you do it. It's worthwhile. I'm not going to clip over and do it here because I think that you'll have better resolution if you just do it at your own computer. So nominal level of measurement describes a variable that has attributes that are merely different, which basically means they're categories. There's no order to them. There's no numeric properties. One could come first, the other one could come first. It just really wouldn't matter. An ordinal level measure is one where a variable has attributes, and when I say attributes I mean like the categories or the choices, those fixed choices that you would look for in a closed-ended question. They have some type of rank ordering along some dimension. So for example, socioeconomic status, the categories of that could be classified as high socioeconomic status, medium socioeconomic status, low socioeconomic status. There is some order to it. The exact distance between high, medium, and low is a little fuzzy, and that's one of the characteristics of an ordinal measure. An interval level measure would also have a rank ordering, but in the interval level measure, the distance between each category or each attribute is equal. So they're not only ordered, but you can precisely measure, an increase of 1 on this particular variable has meaning. In the ordinal example, it does not have meaning. A racial level measure, again, has all the same qualities of a nominal and an ordinal and interval level, with the addition of there's actually a true 0 point. So let's think about these. And here's a handy little way of thinking about these different levels of measurement and how to know what you can do with them in terms of mathematical properties. Okay, so let's kind of look at this and think about which of the following examples are nominal measures. Gender, religious affiliation, political party affiliation, birthplace. Hopefully this is pretty straightforward. And you could say that the answer was all of the above. None of these, they're all categorical variables. None of them have a precise order. And so they're examples of nominal variables. So here's another heuristic to show you this in concrete ways. I'm videotaping. Sorry. Gee, what do you need?
I'm just looking for the laptop so I can work.
So nominal measure, example, gender, categories, male, female. Could also add transgendered. Ordinal measure, example, religiosity, how religious are you? Could ask people on a like scale and get categories from low to high. The distance between them is not fixed. An interval level measure, example would be IQ. You test people and you get scores that have meaning. The distance between them has meaning, and you can rank that on an interval scale, but there's no absolute 0 point. And then in terms of a ratio measure, an example would be income. There'll be people in a society that have zero income. And, this progression is measuring it at increments of 10,000. So when you think about measurement quality, precision and accuracy are very important, and this brings up concepts of reliability and validity. So what is reliability? It's a quality of measurement that really, if you ask the same questions or you observe in the same way, you should get the same results. If your measure is reliable, then you would have that, you would observe that. Your repeated observations should be consistent. So if we were doing a survey and we asked people, did you attend religious services last week? Versus how many times have you attended religious services in your life? It's more likely that you'd get a reliable answer if you ask people to recall something that they did last week versus recall and come up with a number across a lifetime. So when we think about how we want to develop a question, we want to think about how to get the most accurate information, and when someone answers the question, the next time they would encounter that question, they would answer it the same way. And we have a number of different ways in research measurement to check for reliability. Test retest is one method. Another method is to make more than one measurement of a concept and then look across the different samples to see how consistent it is. Use established measures that have been used in other studies and have shown to be reliable in other studies. And do inter-rater reliability of coders who are coding data, like for example in observational data or in qualitative analysis. So validity is the other major part of our interest in accuracy. And validity is really trying to get at whether or not we're correctly measuring the concept that we're trying to measure. So for example, IQ would seem like a more valid measure of intelligence than the number of hours spent in the library. So with validity, again, we're trying to get to make sure that the information that we're gathering is actually measuring that concept that we're trying to measure. And there's all kinds of different types of validity. We won't spend a lot of time on these, but I'll go into it a little bit. Face validity, this is kind of like when you look at the question and your first mental image that comes up of that question should be that, okay, yeah, I see that. This, you ask this question and I understand what it's trying to tap into. So the frequency of attending religious services is some indication of a person's religiosity. Seems to make sense, and you don't need a lot of explanation. Construct and content validity. The construct validity is the degree to which a measure relates to other variables that are similar, and that's really based on, like, would you expect someone who answered questions a certain way to how much, okay. Construct validity is how related it is to other similar concepts that you're measuring, and if you have variables that are very close in their theoretical relationship, then the measurement should line up. Content validity really refers to how how much a measure covers the range of meanings that are included in the concept. So if a concept has multiple dimensions, like socioeconomic status, we wanted to measure educational attainment, income, and occupational prestige. All of those things would be necessary to actually cover the content of the concept of socioeconomic status. So, blank is the degree to which a measure covers the range of meanings within a concept. We just went over that. Content validity. So if you think about what's the difference between validity and reliability, this graphic should help you a little bit. A good measurement technique should be both valid, measuring what it's intended to measure, and reliable, yielding a given measurement dependably over and over again. So sometimes when we're trying to measure something, we're really good at getting repeated results over and over again, but the information that we're gathering isn't accurately measuring what we intend to measure. Sometimes we're doing really well in measuring what we intend to measure, but it's not consistent, and so that would be problematic. What we really want is to be having our observations measure what they're intended to measure and do so dependably. Okay, well, if we come to agreement about what terms mean, we've successfully completed part of the conceptualization process. Which of the following represents those classifications of things that scientists, just getting rid of that.